With patch 1.6, named weapons are going to be a thing now, and they've been renamed to exotic weapons. And instead of the free talent in the bottom slot, every single one of these exotic weapons, they will now come with its own very unique trait or talent that can define a playstyle, maybe even more than a whole gear set can do in some cases. So for today, I wanted to go over all of the exotic weapons in the game and show you how they are changed, and then give you my initial impressions about them. And yes, obviously it's going to be an initial impression. It is not going to be a full review, and my impressions, they may not be final on all of these weapons because there's of course no way that I've had the chance to test them all out yet in every single condition. So, just keep that in mind while watching. Anyway, let's begin. To start off with, we have the Pakan. This weapon has always been a good pickup if you play a lot of PvE content, and it seems that Massive wants this to remain a PvE weapon. The unique talent on it gives the player a 20% larger magazine on the next reload for every kill that you get with the current magazine. And this of course stacks up as many times as you're able to get kills. I think the reason why this is good in PvE is pretty obvious, because the more bullets per magazine that you have, the less you have to reload, and thus the more DPS you can dish out and the faster you can kill those mobs. However, apart from its higher than normal base damage, I don't think that it will be a very interesting pickup for PvP, as you usually, well, you don't really get a lot of kills, and a 20% increased size of the magazine, if you do manage to get a kill, I don't think it's going to give that much value. Second up, we have the Historian, which seems to be a pretty good pickup for skill-orientated players. After you land a bullet with this thing, it will boost your skill power by 20% for 2 seconds long, and then it will drop back to normal. I can see this thing being useful as a secondary weapon, where if you see some enemies in the distance, you quickly swap it out, you land a bullet, and then, for example, you drop your heal or your smart cover down to make it that much stronger. The one thing that I guess I could criticize it for is that the 2-second time window is a little bit on the short side in my opinion. It could be problematic if you're actually using the support station or the turret and you want it to sit in a very specific place. More often than not, you have to grab the thing, you have to wait for the animation, and then you have to move your character's camera around a bit to place it very precisely. And 2 seconds isn't enough of a time window to really do that with a lot of precision. Especially if you're talking about gameplay on consoles, where the camera turning speed and the precision of the camera is usually a bit behind that of a mouse. So, if I were to be Massive, I would extend this to 3 to 4 seconds, but that's just my opinion of course. The Medved has been given a complete overhaul in the way that it functions. Instead of this weapon shooting 8 pellets per round, just as every other shotgun, the developers have made it so that this shotgun only shoots 1 slug. This 1 slug will deal just as much damage as all the 8 pellets combined previously did, but it still makes the weapon a lot more different than might first meet the eye. There are going to be a lot of differences. For example, when you use this weapon, the striker will be very ineffective, as instead of 8 stacks per shot, you will now only get 1 stack. On the other hand though, the single slug is a lot more precise, and hitting the head with this thing will therefore do a lot of damage. It seems to be a high risk, high reward kind of shotgun that only players with really good aim will be able to utilize. That is of course taken in mind that the headshot damage isn't too irrelevant this patch. Next up on the list we have the Caduceus. This thing seems to be back on the menu for both PvE and PvP players. What it does is that it increases the health of everybody in your squad by 1% for every critical hit that you land with this weapon. Now to me, this sounds pretty insane. I don't want to be that guy calling it broken before I've even had the chance to see it in action with the right builds, but man, I can already see 2 people in the squad running this thing in addition with a very strong pulse and just firing away, regaining their health almost as fast as they can lose it. If I were Massive, I would keep a really close eye on this one, as I believe that out of all the weapons, this has the most potential of being straight up broken. The Hungry Hawk seems to be one of the best PvE weapons in the game with the new talent. It gives the player a 20% damage bonus for every kill that you get. And you get to keep that bonus damage until you stop firing. Now the thing about this bonus is that it can also stack, which means that if you manage to kill 3 or 4 enemies, your bonus damage will sit at 60 or even 80% until the end of the magazine. I believe a must-have for this weapon is to have the talent Meticulous on it, as this has the chance of refilling the magazine after a kill, meaning that you don't have to stop firing, and thus, your bonus, it will remain for a longer time. For PvE, as I said, it's great. For PvP, however, I don't really see that much appeal to it, unless you quickly use it on a downed player, finish him off, and then continue to fire 100 bullets with that extra 20% damage. I could see that work, but I don't think it's something that you really want to rely on. The Liberator and the Centurion are two named weapons that, as of patch 1.6, will work together with each other and will only work together with each other. You will need to have both equipped at the same time in order to get value out of their traits. This is what they do. Each shot that you fire with the Liberator gives you 5% extra headshot damage on your next headshot with the Centurion. And getting a kill with the Centurion gives you 10% rate of fire on all your weapons for 10 seconds. It seems to be a pretty interesting pair of buffs, some synergy can be found there, but it's also nothing out of the ordinary. Players can shoot a magazine empty at a player and then quickly switch to their sidearm to try to finish them off with that extra damage on the headshot. And I'm guessing that is the intended design, quickly swap to your sidearm when you have to get a kill. And then if you actually do get the kill, your RPM is buffed up by 10% so that you can move on to your next kill more efficiently. What I can see myself doing though is equipping the Liberator in my secondary weapon slot and then using a completely different weapon as my primary to down a player. And then I can just quickly equip the Centurion before I bash someone into the ground. This way I will still get the kill with the Centurion, my RPM will still be buffed for 10 seconds, but I'm not using the Liberator at all. In this case I would probably also reroll Predatory or Talented to the Centurion, so in that case I even get more buffs for just quickly switching to my sidearm before finishing someone off. However, I'm not sure if this is the intended design. If it is though, it seems to be a very powerful item to have. The Tenebrae, if that's how you call it, also seems to be a very good pickup for PvE. What it does is that it resets the cooldowns of your skills for the entire squad every time that you manage to destroy a weak point on an NPC. Even inside of the Dark Zone I can see situations where this can give players a tremendous power spike. For example, by going into the underground, having your team throw some Seeker Mines at other players, and then have you, with the Tenebrae, will away at some cleaner weak spots so that their cooldown on every one of those Seeker Mines get reset 3 or 4 times. As I said, looks very powerful, but at the same time it also seems very situational, so I wouldn't really know how to balance this properly. I think that I would suggest putting a small cooldown on this weapon for resetting the skills. You know, for example, that you can only do it once every 5 or once every 10 seconds just to avoid any game-breaking scenarios by people just spamming Seeker Mines over and over and over again. Other than that though, really looking forward to trying this out. The Ire and Hildur, if that's how you call them, are again 2 weapons that will only work when you have both of them equipped. You probably don't know about these guns yet, and that is because they are newly introduced in patch 1.6 and will be replacing the weapon currently listed as the Valkyria. The trait reads that for every hit with the Hildur, the player will be getting an extra 1% critical hit damage, and just like with Strikers, this bonus decreases by 1% every second as well. Now the Hildur, it doesn't have any crit chance rolled on it though, so you can't utilize it, but luckily, the Ire has a bonus crit chance amount on it by default. So the idea here is that players can stack up critical hit damage by playing with one weapon and then switching to the other to unleash it with more critical hit chance. Now I do think that this sounds very, very powerful. It is basically a buffed up version of the Striker, because unlike with the Striker, missing shots with this does not reduce the amount of stacks that you have. And also, I'm quite curious to see how this will work with things such as the Precision Talent and the Pulse, as both of those things also continue to give the player critical hits with the old defense gear set, even though that wasn't intended. If the Hildur is there to build up crit damage, I don't think that it should have any crit chance to begin with. The Cassidy is a weapon that I almost forgot existed, as double-barreled shotguns have always been a bad pickup in the division. This is simply because it's a high-risk weapon, meaning that if you miss 2 of your shots, you aren't doing any damage at all, but on top of that, it is also a pretty low-reward weapon, as even if you hit both shots in the head, it usually doesn't result in a kill anyway. The special trait on the Cassidy will allow you to shoot both barrels in very short succession to each other when double tapping the fire button, which will not only result in more burst, but will also result in more sustained damage, as you can fire those shots a lot more quickly. Is this enough to make it a valuable weapon choice? I don't really think so, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. The Warlord is getting a very interesting talent which can both be good for damage dealers and tanky players. It reduces all damage taken by 20% when you're firing your weapon, but all that damage you are mitigating will also be applied instantly the moment that you have to stop firing your weapon. I like the idea that this weapon brings to the table, but I can also see this being a very frustrating thing to use. Usually players are shooting at each other, you know, they're fighting each other, and then one player has to be popping a medkit. Now usually you want to pop this medkit in the last segment of your health, you know, to get that critical save. But that causes you to stop firing, so if you were using a Warlord and you're getting to low health, you might instantly die the moment that you try to heal yourself. You can't really clutch out a medkit anymore in the last second, and you also don't really know when you should be popping a medkit. What I think would be a better functionality for this weapon is if the 20% damage that is mitigated would be applied in the form of a damage over time effect. Let's say a bleed that you cannot cleanse that ticks for 5 seconds. This way the whole talent will remain to work exactly the same, except players can now confidently face tank and trade fire at moments without worrying too much what happens at the very second that they have to reload. Next up we have the Damascus. This has a pretty boring talent in my opinion. When you draw this weapon, the damage on it will be increased by 20%, but after 2 seconds the damage will also be reduced by 20%, so this, I guess, can be used to try and very quickly finish someone off, but it also seems that the expert talent on it has been removed to replace this. So I actually think that this is a pretty significant nerf, and I don't believe that this weapon will be used a whole lot. The Golden Rhino, as far as I know, also pretty boring. The talent has not been changed and it just adds a 200% stagger bonus to the weapon. Which, even in PvE, I don't really see a whole lot of value there unless I'm missing something. The Thompson and the Tommy gun both have not been changed either and still have their 11% extra hipfire damage on them. Now, I do not believe that this is a bad bonus per se. I actually think that this can be pretty powerful, but I also thought that the whole idea with patch 1.6 was to drive away from the hipfire fest that this game essentially is at the moment, and adding talents like this that give you 11% more hipfire damage, that is only going to promote more hip firing, and I think that that is a very bad decision to leave it in like this. I would much rather have it the other way around, 11% extra damage when aiming down sights. The Urban DMR is another boring one here. It's also not getting a change. It still does 10% more damage to targets that have a status effects on them, which I believe is not powerful enough. Especially now that status effects come with diminishing returns in PvP, I think this thing straight up needs a buff in numbers, otherwise I can't really see any use for this. Last up on the list we have the FAMAS, which still has the uncomplicated talent, and nothing else has been changed. I believe that this has been turned into an exotic weapon for the sheer purpose of it not working with Alpha Bridge anymore. Uncomplicated is breaking Alpha Bridge? Well, just make the FAMAS an exotic weapon. Problem solved. Now it doesn't work with Alpha Bridge anymore. Yeah, that's all there is to the FAMAS. And I guess that is all there is to it for this video as well, because those are all the exotic weapons in patch 1.6. It definitely seems like a very interesting lineup, so much opportunities for some crazy builds. The only thing that I'm wondering right now is if normal weapons will still be used at all, because as far as I can tell, there really isn't a reason to use a talent like Brutal or Competent over most of these insanely cool talents, but I guess we'll just have to wait that out and see how that goes. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I will see you guys later, or like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.